Try that. Okay. Ready? Okay, so we did this, or somebody did this lecture for us. I can't believe we haven't did this. I know we've talked about a lot of these herbs, but this is going to be the 25-ish most essential home medicine cabinet herbs. These herbs we could call the prepper herbs, the homestead herbs, the zombie apocalypse herbs, the 25 most utilitarian herbs, the 25 go-to herbs for first aid. This is really like a first aid list. These are basically the top 25, 30 herbs that just day in and day out you can use constantly. So obviously there's going to have to be a lot of first aid things in this category, right? Like things for infections, wounds, stomach aches, headaches, fevers, viral infections, bacterial infections. But these are the ones that all of you should know by the back of your hand. So since you're all advanced now, we'll do the thermodynamics of every herb. And how many uses for each one do you want to do? Because we could have hundreds. What do we want to limit it to? Like 5 for each herb? 7, 5-ish, 7, 5 to 10. Okay, so I want to try to get through this whole thing in 2 hours. So these are herbs that I've used time and time again in first aid settings. These are the herbs where you're at your grandma's house and someone's having a problem. Like the herbs we're using in this lecture are pretty widely available. Most of these are going to be in your cupboard already or in your backyard. So we're trying to keep exotic herbs and all kinds of other things off this list. This is things you can grow easily. These are things that are in the spice rack already. These are things that are growing in the wild like crazy, that are easy to wildcraft or harvest in emergencies. Or these are things that are pretty easily available at any health food store, probably even Walgreens. So this list is super practical, right? We're not going to do anything too bizarre or obscure. All Western herbs, no Chinese herbs or anything like that that people might not have access to. Okay. Okay. We ready for this? Because this could take like 4 hours. So we're going to try to zoom through it. We're going to start with the most diverse herbs. So the 1 hour mark, somebody remind me when we get to 1 hour. Okay. Herb number 1, believe it or not. Green, this is not a good one. Green tea. Oh no. Green tea or black tea. We always prefer green tea or pu'er tea, right? The property of green tea is very cold, very cooling. That's why we prefer it. Black tea is going to be warm. Pu'er would be warm, so a little bit different. But we always have access to green tea, even though it's not from America per se. Every grocery store, every Dollar General, gas stations even often have this. So this is a pretty common thing we're going to find. We've talked about this before. When we use green tea, what's our preferred way to use it medicinally? What method or what way to take it? Just the tea, right? Capsules of it are just silly and nonsensical. Usually they're over concentrated and processed and lack some of these first aid properties. There's no need to tincture green tea because most everything we want is water soluble. So the alcohol of a tincture is really not doing anything. So, and green tea, black tea preserves well on its own, right? Easily 100 uses for green tea, just easily 100 uses. I'm going to test you all. Give me like at least 5 first aid uses for green tea. So topically, it's really good for sunburn or radiation burn of any kind. This would include 4th of July fireworks burns, sunburn. If the burn is really bad, we're probably just going to make a tea and maybe pour it on the area, or we're going to soak a wet cloth in the tea and put on the area. But we could also do a cold compress, right? Where we would make green tea, get it nice and wet and soft, and then just put it right on the burn. It's going to draw a lot of pus out. It's going to do all kinds of stuff for a burn. So this would be radiation burn from chemotherapy, from radiation treatment with cancer. This could be from a sunburn, a chemical burn. This could be from farm chemical burn. Any kind of burn we have, green tea is helpful for, right? Okay, another use for green tea. Green tea is a really good preventative for heat stroke and heat exhaustion and what we call summer heat. Drinking it preventatively before we go out to the heat is really beneficial and helpful because it does cool our body temperature. Green tea is not a diaphoretic, it is a febrifuge. So green tea actually lowers body temperature, increases metabolism, but kind of can regulate body temperature. Okay. So we can do this iced, or we can drink it just daily. So even in the summer, we can have hot tea, right? Okay, another use, that's 2. So green tea is also, because it is anti-inflammatory and because it is anti-allergy, it's good topically on any kind of a bug bite. One of the easiest ways to use green tea topically too is just a cheapy old tea bag, right? Just from the grocery store or something. It doesn't have to be super high grade. We just brew a cup of tea and just put the tea bag right on the bug bite. So it would be good for itchy bug bites. It's good for the inflammation of bug bites. And it's good if people have like allergy responses to bug bites. Kind of treats all aspects of it. Okay, what else? Well, yeah, so it's one of our best cancer preventatives. It's one of the best things we can do to help reduce the likelihood of a variety of cancers to help people have cancer. It's one of the best things we can do to just improve quality of outcome. Not so much like a first aid use, but it's a very important use, right? Okay. This green tea and black tea can be helpful for diarrhea. Black tea especially, a little bit more than green tea, but green tea or black tea or pu'er, my favorite's always pu'er, right? What's the difference between, just to review, what's the difference between green tea, black tea, and pu'er? Besides their overall nature. What's that? Right, the aging and oxidation process, right? Green tea is the least oxidized or least processed. Black tea is the most processed or oxidized. That's why it turns black, right? Pu'er is this, remember, it's its own category of its own. It's unlike all the others. It's fermented and aged, so it's kind of its own creature. So, yes. What else will we use green tea in a first aid situation? It is extremely anti-allergy, right? So when people have acute allergies, like could be environmental allergies, you're on vacation and you just have like runny nose, itchy eyes, sneezing, coughing, those types of things. But it's also good for like acute allergy reactions, like you put on a sunburn, lotion, and you're allergic to. This happened to my daughter recently. She's allergic to it, her whole body is red and itchy. Like just, all I had really was green tea. Worked really well. So green tea can be used for like acute allergies when people are super inflamed internally. or just the symptoms of allergies with like your sinuses, eyes, ears, skin. Or if you get into like a patch of some allergic plant, or the only kind of allergies it's not super good for would be food allergies, except pu'er, the fermented aged green tea, is really, really good for food allergy reactions. Like if we're traveling, you've eaten something that you're reacting to with digestive problems, that would be one thing we would do. Okay, what else? There's so many uses for this. Another one would be fever, or getting back to summer heat stroke fevers. Green tea will bring a fever down oftentimes. This would be more taken internally, or someone's had heat stroke with a fever. We would combine it with watermelon or something like that, right? Okay. The probably most important use of green tea and first aid is that it is a most important herb for poisoning of any kind. You've ingested a poison, someone has accidentally poisoned themselves, you were exposed to a poison. I had a client who just accidentally drank like cleaning fluid. This is like anytime you've been poisoned, irritated, internally burned or scarred, and that stuff is moving through your sinuses or skin or body. This is because, remember, green tea is the ultimate detoxifying agent. But we also use it for radiation poisoning, right? Chemotherapy poisoning, chemotherapy side effects. If people are exposed to radiation, if there ever is like a nuclear event or a reactor would have an issue in America, in addition to iodine, green tea would be the number one thing we would grab. You would just drink green tea constantly. If you're ever, as far as like your zombie apocalypse prepping, right? So if you're exposed to any kind of radiation, this would include, oh, by the way, ready? Because I get asked this a lot, and people try to make this really complicated. You have been exposed to the toxicity of a dye used in MRI, contrast, because that is a heavy metal. Those dyes that are used are heavy metals. A lot of people have a lot of side effects from them. That's why they sometimes give people an option, right, to use them or not. So the only thing you need to know if you're going to have an MRI or CT scan and you have to do the dye that is really toxic is you do green tea 3 days before, immediately before you drink that stuff, and after. And you also drink green tea just all day after the scans, after the MRI or CT scan, because that's like a huge radiation exposure, and for about a week afterwards. That's like the number one thing you can do. And in patients that have a lot of side effects from the dye and like allergy-like reactions, green teas work better than any fancy thing ever. Just drinking the tea, 3 cups a day. So helpful, yeah. If someone has like because like allergic reactions to like a food dye would be kind of different than a food allergy, because it's almost more like a chemical reaction than like a allergy reaction. So yeah, food dye reactions it's helpful for, which I get myself. So I puke if I eat Cheetos or Doritos with the FDC red. Yeah, it's in a lot of stuff. Yeah, when I was a kid, I really puked from it. I can eat organic Cheetos because it's not in there. They have an organic version. I found out with the kids. Yeah. Yep. So that is one of the most important things I want you to do, to remember. The contrast dye, radiation exposure. The the radiation exposure of walking through security all the time when you're a flight attendant and getting scanned constantly. I mean, that's a lot of radiation exposure, right? Getting x-rays, dentists give out x-rays like candy, like they don't get really, they're not very super cautious about them like they are in the medical physician world. Dentists, it just seems like they're a little bit haphazard with the radiation x-ray rooms, and everything they're not really very protected and stuff. So that is something, even for x-ray radiation, we do green tea. Okay. We know this works really good because it's even been tested on the radiation exposure of astronauts and been shown, because when you're in outer space, you're exposed to more radiation and x-rays and all kinds of things from outer space that the atmosphere of the earth protects us all from. So green tea can be pu'er better for a stomach ache, but sometimes it can be good for a stomach ache and nausea and queasiness and that too. I mean, green tea is like a decent cold flu remedy. If you don't have anything else, it can sometimes just help the symptoms of a cold or flu, but more so like the fever though. But here, like if you've been poisoned or had an x-ray, we're talking like, not just a cup or two a day, like you would just drink a lot of green tea in a day. And you can safely drink a lot of tea in a day. Anytime I've been in China, I mean, I just drink tea all day long. I don't know, 10, 20 cups of tea a day. I don't know. It's like a lot. So you can safely drink a lot of tea. Okay. Good. I think that's over 5, right? Okay. All right. That was a good one. That's one of my all-time favorites. Okay. Number 2. Some of this is like my own list. Every practitioner would have their own medicine cabinet lists. But for me, coming in at number 2, yarrow flower, because, right, if you can't regulate bleeding things, then you're maybe in trouble. As a disclaimer here, again, we're not trying to stop, like life-threatening bleeding or wounds here, but these are anytime you're bleeding, anytime you're cut, even while you're running to the emergency room or to get stitches or things like that, we can do yarrow topically on cuts and bleeding wounds, and we could use it internally too. This includes like pussy infected wounds that are bleeding or tumors that are bleeding, not just like cuts. I've had a lot of clients with end stage tumors that won't shrink and they just bleed constantly. And for that, we can also do yarrow flower both topically. My preferred way to use this is either the tea we would put right into the cut or wound to kind of clean it, or the tincture is my favorite because it's sterile, right? It's got the alcohol that's sterile. So it burns, but you drop it right into the cut or wound or on the sore. But this would also be the remedy we would do in an emergency first aid situation for internal bleeding too. Like you've had an ulcer that's ruptured, you have blood in your stool, female might have like a bleeding fibroid that's out of control, or a tumor that's bleeding out of control, or vomiting up blood from like the stomach flu. These are all things that we would do internally. Remember, yarrow helps bleeding literally anywhere in the body internally. We use it for blood in the urine of UTIs, all those things. Again, like we're still often going to be going to the hospital, but I mean, we see this a lot with people with UTIs that are being treated. There's still a lot of blood in the urine, and there's really nothing else the medical profession can do. So we give them yarrow to kind of manage the bleeding. Or a lot of patients with more severe digestive diseases like colitis and ulcerative colitis, And ulcers, even if people are being treated, often they'll still have constant chronic bleeding. So we want to manage that. But as far as like actual cuts and lacerations, this is one of the things we would definitely do, and the tincture works really fast for bleeding. There's a lot of case studies of practitioners around America that have used this in some pretty intense situations where people were in like a wilderness setting where there was no other medical intervention possible. That pretty impressive results. So remember, yarrow is also antibacterial. And so what do we call this action of yarrow, just to review? This property of it to stop bleeding. Maybe something we usually just say hemostatic. Different names for this action category. Old books will just call it a stypic. Remember back in the day? Remember when my dad shaved when I was younger? Every guy and gal had a stypic pen at home, right? I don't even know, some mineral. What was in stypic? Some salt. Chalky, some kind of mineral. Yeah. You just put it on your bleeding cuts and it would just like stop it. So sometimes these are just, in old books we'll call them stypics. Yeah. So just reading the documented old herbal medicine history of Poland and Ukraine today, and yarrow flower is one of the top 5 most frequent. Over 100 uses were documented for yarrow and the interviews they did in the 1930s. So it was one of the top 5 herbs used, because also in that time and that place, this is like before hospitals and medical clinics were really widely available. So, you know, a lot of self-doctoring, a lot of wilderness first aid. So yarrow flower, the most common herb used in the survey. So pretty cool. Has a lot of other first aid use. One other first aid use, only one other one we really need to know. As a diaphoretic for, we use this for the onset of colds or flus as a diaphoretic to help with viral infections or managing a really severe fever from any kind of infection, bacterial or viral. And then we talked about this a lot. This is one of the main local herbs we do to regulate our body temperature in summer to cool us down. And we can take a bath of yarrow to cool us down if we have heat stroke or heat exhaustion or summer heat. But preferably we just drink a little bit of the tea preventatively, right? So yarrow works great as a tea, except it's pretty bitter. Works amazing as a tincture from the fresh flowers. But the capsules are decent working too and really cheap. So its energy is what? Cold. Yeah. So we have some hot hemostatics, but most all of our hemostatic plants are cold because we associate cold with kind of anti-inflammatory too. Okay. So we're going to use the flowering tops of yarrow, but in a first aid situation, we can use the leaves too. They work decent. Okay. And we also use yarrow for excessive menstrual bleeding. Women have like fibroids or tumors or cysts that are bleeding out of control. Until they can get, you know, the medical procedure done. This is like a way we sometimes have to help manage the bleeding. So. Yeah, so yarrow for first aid use too. This is one of our main midwifery herbs. We do not use it before because it's contraindicated during pregnancy. But after pregnancy, this is the, together with calendula, this is our main herb that we use as a peri-rinse, topically rinse the tearing and to create healing. Because right, women shouldn't bleed for like a month or months after delivering a baby, right? So that's not natural to bleed for that long. So we rinse topically with yarrow and it's okay. Don't worry about it, Chris. We're getting our carpets clean in a couple of weeks anyway. So good. This is a GMP incident though, so you'll have to be documented. It's yeah, yarrow is usually typically yarrow is an herb we use more short term, but in a formula we will often, like with, you know, especially like in colitis and things like that, I'll have it in the formula indefinitely. Yeah. And remember, yarrow for first aid, why it's also on this list, it is a digestive bitter too, for stomach aches and nausea and queasiness and diarrhea and loose stools. It is a great digestive bitter. So it's one of our best first aid herbs. Sadly enough, if you walk into a health food store today, you're probably going to have a hard time finding it, unfortunately. The natives called this chipmunk tail or squirrel's tail because the leaves kind of look like a squirrel's tail. The leaves to me just look like your blood vessels. It looks like your vascular system. Okay. There's a lot of other uses, but that's a lot, right? Okay. Questions on yarrow? Right now, I feel like green tea and yarrow are a true top 1 and 2. As far as like yarrow, we got to give a lot of weight to it because we don't have a lot of stuff for bleeding in a wilderness survival situation, right? So this is one of the best. Okay. Number 3, we're going to go with very common European herb, calendula flower. Thermodynamic nature is what? It's ruled by the sun. So it's warmish, right? Does it combine really well with yarrow that's very cold? That's a great like combination. So actually yarrow and calendula together topically probably can, in a first aid situation, can help about any kind of topical wound, sprain, anything, bruise, right? Contusion. So calendula is going to be our great skin healer. Doesn't stop bleeding super good, but it does everything else. You have a cut, you have a wound, you have sores, you have infected sore, you have infected toenail, you know, infected tooth, infected wound. This is going to be like in a wilderness situation, yarrow is just going to be essential, right? It is our main wound healing, skin healing herb. You have a scab, you have any kind of surgery scar, right? You have to stitch yourself up, you've been stitched. Yeah, any kind of scar tissue. It's just one of our main herbs for wound healing. Any wound. This includes bruises, contusions, trauma, pulled muscles, pulled tendons, pulled ligaments, right? Any kind of injury to your muscle or tendon or ligament. Okay. It does not help arthritis and stuff like that topically, but topically it'll heal about any other kind of problem. It's also good on bug bites, spider bites, poisonous bites. It does not work quite as good as echinacea for poisonous bites, but it's a close second. It's super easy to grow, right? Anybody can grow these in your garden. It's super easy to grow. It's related to the marigold, but it's a special kind of marigold. Okay. For pressure ulcers, like with the elderly, or people have wounds like varicose ulcers and wounds that have like staph and MRSA and antibiotic resistant wounds that people have. We're going to do this internally and topically both. So internally, it's one of our great lymphatic herbs, right? But how do we use this internally more for first aid? What type of use? This is like, think of this. What's that? So yeah, think of this as internally as warm aloe vera. So all the properties we would think of aloe vera for internally, like soothing the throat, the mouth, the gums, the tongue, canker sores, ulcers in your mouth, ulcers in your throat, irritated esophagus, ulcers, irritated stomach, intestines are inflamed. This is just the warm version of aloe internally to heal from pretty much from the tip of your tongue all the way to the rectal area. It's going to heal your entire gut. So we're going to use it like after people have had maybe food poisoning or diarrhea or any kind of major digestive inflammation. Ulcers is one of the great ulcer remedies. We can use it to help acute diarrhea. Yeah, because it is very antibacterial. So if the diarrhea is caused by like a bad bacteria or something, it can be very helpful. It's also one of our main lymphatic cleansing agents, but we don't always have a lot of like lymph emergency type situations, right? Except blood poisoning. That is something we use for blood poisoning is calendula. So lymphatic poisoning, remember, or what the doctors call blood poisoning, right? Remember how we talked about people get the streaks up the lymphatic vessels? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Echinacea is better for blood poisoning and coming up really soon. But calendula, it would be like the European counterpart. Yeah. I give this like immediately after surgery. Usually diluted like in a little bit of water or something, but most of people gargle with it and then drink it. Mm-hmm. So calendula, the tea works decent, works really good, not super tasty. All the marigold stuff is a little bitter, but the tincture works really good for this. The capsules, decent. So very cheap, very easy to grow. But yeah, it also is also good for sore throat and loss of voice and strep throat. Has a lot of good throat healing properties too. But for canker sores, it's one of the all-time best remedies. Okay. We always say with calendula, any sore inside or outside the body that looks pus filled. Have you ever seen like a colon polyp? We use calendula for colon polyps. Or people that have had a colon polyp removed in a colonoscopy or something like that. We would use this to kind of heal that tissue up. Okay. Probably a lot of other first aid. This is also one of our major, we said, bug bite remedies. Inflammation and reaction on the skin to like a bug bite, bee sting, anything like that. Mm-hmm. It is helpful for sunburn too. Just not as good as like green tea or something, but is pretty helpful for sunburn. First aid use, this is also one of our main like yeast infections of the skin, like ringworm is like a yeast parasite fungus, fungal skin infection, toenail fungus, vaginal yeast infections. This is a major first aid remedy when women just have any kind of vaginal irritation, itching, pain, any kind of vaginal sores. Women that have a lot of soreness after having like some type of topical surgery. Also, we would use this a lot, calendula flower. It's also like yarrow, one of our main postpartum peri rinses. Like the only two herbs we really need to know would be like calendula and yarrow as a peri rinse after delivery. As soon as stitches are out, we're putting this on every cut, scar, opening, everything. What's that? I like tincture of this the best personally for topical. Yeah. So a lot of these herbs, like in my first aid kit, I have these as tinctures because they're just more, they don't go bad, they don't freeze. You know, I mean, I once met this young herbalist and she showed me her first aid kit. It was like 3 gigantic duffel bags of like a couple pounds of each herb. And I was like, this is not like even practical. You can tell they hadn't really implemented anything they ever learned, right? Because like with this first aid kit we're talking about here and just a little tackle box, you can have your entire traveling kind of herbal doctor kit. So calendula flower. What's nice, like if you make a first aid kit of these out of tinctures, I mean, they're going to last 10, 20 years too. So even if you don't use them, they're there. Never really going to go bad. Okay, 3. Number 4. Licorice root. Why in the heck is licorice root up here? Ooh, this has so many first aid uses, right? What are they? One of the most important as a herbalist, remember, is when people do have serious emergency allergic reactions, like where the throat is swelling up, and you would normally use or want to use like an EpiPen or something like that, but you don't have it because you're in the wilderness. Licorice is our closest bet. I've had about 6 times where someone's throat started swelling up in a remote area where licorice tincture just totally saved the day. Really scary situations. We Yep. If you have a tincture for something like that, like if it's an adult and you don't, you might not know the person you're trying to help, right? As you're trying to get to like a hospital or something, you're going to do about 9 drops every couple minutes and just listen to people. Minutes. Just keep giving 9 drops till you see how they feel. Like if a kid, you probably give about 3 drops. So now one person I treated was, I don't know what she actually, it was a younger girl. It was my landlord, it was her daughter, and I don't know what happened. She ate something or something happened that was really fast. As they were loading her up and deciding what to do, we were just giving her licorice and throat was kind of like swelling up. So licorice is for like true allergic reactions, but also because it's so anti-allergy, this is also what we would do if we don't have Benadryl, if we don't, for like just seasonal allergies. Or when, remember, licorice is also anti-inflammatory, so it is very similar to prednisone or steroids. So like if we have a situation where people have severe inflammation, like your throat's inflamed or your stomach is inflamed or you're in pain from like some kind of internal inflammation, this is what we're going to use. If people get food poisoning or poisoned, we're also going to use this. Food allergy reactions, this does work really good. Because remember, licorice is good for, are you ready? Just pretty much all the way down. Like mouth sores, canker sores, it's the best. Better than anything. People have irritated esophagus, it's the best. Acid reflux reactions, right? It's good for nausea. It's good for vomiting in a first aid situation. It's good for motion sickness and queasiness. Good for diarrhea. It's good for extreme cramping in the stomach or bowels. That's just like a couple of things, right? It's amazing for. So as far as your gut, there's really not, I mean, it's like the herb that really helps about anything possible with the gut. So that's why it's one of our main herbs with like something serious like an ulcer. Licorice is one of the main ulcer remedies. It's actually an approved drug in parts of Europe for ulcers, right? It works. It is an antispasmodic, so it's good for, yeah, hiatal hernia, things that would relate to the pyloric sphincter. And remember, it also coats and soothes like slippery elm because it's demulcent. So it not only like gets inflammation out, but it kind of coats and soothes the area. In fact, the old herbalists, you know, before antibiotics were invented, they called licorice the infallible remedy for ulcers because it almost always worked, even in like a hospital setting. It's even been used a lot historically in older times. So licorice. We're also going to use this for acute asthma because it's a very strong bronchodilator. And it helps like a steroid inhaler, like it helps inflammation in the respiratory tract. Again, this is like as we're getting people to a medical treatment. Acute allergies is also a really great adrenal tonic. When would we want an adrenal tonic though? In a first aid situation or like a wilderness medical emergency. Someone's in shock and they like pass out or they faint or they're so weak they can't like get up because it's going to give you like taking a steroid or something that's going to give you a shot of adrenaline. But we would also use it if someone's blood pressure is crashing because they're in shock or fainting, or they're having some kind of an issue where they've been so, you know, whether it's dehydrated or whatever is happening and their blood pressure is dropping and they're passing out. We would use this to like re-energize them. And it does elevate blood pressure if we give a big enough dose. We also use this for poisoning from all kinds of things because again, it coats and soothes. Like especially if people have like, occasionally people have drank like poisonous things by accident. And, you know, you can take a steroid to manage that, but the licorice will coat and soothe all that irritated tissue. Like the lady that drank the detergent, you know, like the licorice just like completely soothed everything really quick. You know, her inside, she said, felt like sunburn from like her tongue all the way to her rectum. So licorice like to save the day completely. You can kind of grow this, but I mean, it's really easy to get. We can get licorice root most any health food store. It's pretty widely available. Forgot the E on the end. Sometimes in a first aid situation, we might even find the real licorice candy, right? The little black little pellets that are really not very common anymore in America. Yeah, the only challenge with this herb, we said, is that it can elevate blood pressure. So if we're going to give somebody like a huge dose, we just have to be aware of that or be watchful for that, right? Okay. I'm pacing myself. I'm just realizing we're not even through 5 and it's almost an hour. That's what I knew would happen. Okay. But licorice, that is a lifesaver. I've also used it on people that have overdosed on like crazy psychedelic drugs and mushroom experiences to like kind of shock them back into their body. I've been called in on those types of things a lot. Green tea is also very good for that because of the caffeine. Okay, next one. I think we're on 5, right? Echinacea. Why echinacea in a top 5? First of all, energy, direction. Cool, right? not cold, cool. Echinacea root, one of our main prairie plants. This is in the first aid for a number of reasons. The biggest one being there's really no other remedy that I know of that's good for poisonous bites. This includes scorpion stings, rattlesnake, cottonmouth, water moccasin, any kind of viper, poisonous snake bite. Remember how we talked about even if people have been bitten by a rattlesnake years ago and they're having chronic pain, you can do this topically and internally. But for like a bite, you would do this topically internally. You know, the last time in Nebraska, a couple of years ago, somebody almost died out in the sandhills. Kid was hunting with his dad and fell onto a rattlesnake and got bit like 30 times or something. And guess what? There wasn't enough anti-venom in the state of Nebraska to treat the child. He did eventually live and make it, but this is like anti-venom is not always widely available in this part of the world, right? Even at UNMC, they had the life flight in there. Like they didn't have enough anti-venom to really help him. They had to order it from, I don't know how that works, somewhere else. So this would also be black widow bites, which I've seen a lot of. I've seen even more brown recluse bites, so poisonous spider bites. Or people who get bit by a bug, but these people that have allergies and just the skin goes crazy from even little bug bites. Or sometimes chiggers get out of hand with the reaction. So echinacea we're going to do topically and internally both for these types of things. Tick bites. Yes, that's good job. That's the other why it's in the top 5. Yes, it's our main go-to. Anybody that's had a tick on them, anybody that knows that had a tick actually they had to pull off from a bite, we're going to treat the tick bite topically for at least a week, just constantly. The area that got bit, we're going to monitor it for like bullseye rashes and other things. But we're also going to give echinacea internally. Children, adults, elderly, everybody from a tick bite gets this. The idea is just don't let the tick bite take over your body, right? That's what we're doing here. If we can get this sucker immediately, if you know you're having a reaction, and I always tell people like, yeah, this is like one of the few situations where I'm like, you just run to the doctor for an antibiotic. If you're starting to get like immune symptoms after a tick bite, it is totally worth it. Most Nebraska doctors aren't very tick knowledgeable, so you might have to really fight them about it, that you want an antibiotic, because they don't always know how serious it can be. On the East Coast, you're getting an antibiotic even if you don't know you got bit. But I don't know. What's the vet say? Yeah. Do you give antibiotics though to tick bites for animals right away to be safe? Okay. Yeah. So the good thing is that for all tick diseases, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Lyme, like all of them across the board, echinacea is good for. Yeah. And remember, Lyme's disease is here. It's been here for a long time. And Rocky Mountain spotted fever, all these tick diseases. Okay. So we're going to give this internally and topically on any kind of a poisonous bite. And by topically, we might mean we're just going to smother the area constantly, right? Okay. We're also going to use echinacea when it's in this because it's the best known historical remedy. This was used with great success before hospitals for blood poisoning, or what we now call sepsis or septic wounds, or lymphatic poisoning, when poisons are getting out of your lymph and into your blood and moving towards your heart and you can die from. So echinacea is one of the main remedies. It's also really good to give people, I always tell people, if you've ever had blood poisoning or sepsis, just as soon as you get home, you're gonna have to take echinacea for a month to clear all of that from your system, because people are usually in a really bad way after sepsis. Just feel immune systems off, fatigued, like, so that's somewhat of a first aid application, right?
How much do they take?
Yeah, for like a poisonous bite or a tick bite, we would do like the usual dose of like one for an adult, 1 to 2 droppers of the tincture 3 times a day. But topically, we would just do it as often as we could. For blood poisoning, we might do 1 to 2 droppers every hour. If it's like we're on the way to maybe get medical care or antibiotics or something. Yeah, it's a very, yeah, that's because we use the echinacea. And I should make this important point we've talked about in class, but I'll reiterate it. We are using only angustifolia. Why? Because we have pallida, we have purpurea, which is the really cute one that we use in landscaping. I can't believe I bought a landscape variety for my front yard. I just feel like I just can't believe I did it. It was just so cute. I had to adopt it. I just had to adopt it. There's Tennesseeensis. Why angustifolia? It's the one that's native to this part of Nebraska and the Sandhills especially. It is the one that the eclectic herbal doctors used again and again and again for blood poisoning and all these tick diseases and these things, poisonous bites. This is the absolute species that works. So when you go to the health food store, you're probably getting purpurea. So you got to make sure for your first aid kit, you have pure echinacea and angustifolia, just the pale cone flower, the one that grows in Nebraska. The short grass prairie, right? Purpurea is a tall grass prairie echinacea variety.
So if you had sepsis in the past, echinacea and yarrow, correct? Or just echinacea?
Yeah, it's echinacea is so good for that. Yeah, even if you had like sepsis in the past and you still feel like you just kind of haven't ever been the same since. Yeah.
So in that case, you would take it 3 times a day.
Mhm.
Drop it 3 times a day.
Yeah, usually like if you're doing it for something that happened in the past, like sepsis, be like a dropper probably 3 times a day for about a month. Yeah. And expecting to get like reactions from it, right? Yeah. So it's also good for acute sore throat, viral throat infections. It's very good for. Remember, echinacea has a lot of anti-allergy. It's very anti-inflammatory to your immune system. So we can also use it when people are having like stronger allergy reactions, especially like if your whole body breaks out in a rash. That's where echinacea really excels. Like when you're having a whole body reaction to some allergic experience, or you took a drug that you were allergic to, you like a whole body rash. Okay. A lot of other uses. Let's try to keep it there because that is so important to know. I think I told you about the one I was really young, the brown recluse patient I had. I just walked in this room and it was like, it just smelled like you could just smell the sepsis. It was so disgusting. I'll never forget the smell of it. So bad. Echinacea, remember, is also good for when you have like a dental abscess, even if you're on antibiotics, but you don't feel like you're getting better. It will help with manage the lymphatic system to activate in that area to help drain that out. So we love echinacea anytime people have an infection and they have swollen lymph glands in the neck and throat and a sore throat. It's spot on. So we can use this for viral infections of all types, colds, flus, COVID, all kinds of things, right? It's also good for that. But the specific indications of echinacea are always a swollen throat or tender glands in your throat. Tongue for echinacea, the worse the tongue coating, the better echinacea fits, especially when we get into like black and brown tongue coatings. That happens with sepsis. We use echinacea. Yeah. I think I told you I was pretty young. I had this patient that came in. She'd been in and out of the hospital for sepsis, and I think it started with like a surgery infection or something. And this was maybe like a month afterwards. I think she'd been in and out of the ER and hospital like, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. And she came in, I looked at her tongue and I was like, oh crap, like you are still like infected big time. And I had to convince her to go to the ER, and the sepsis was like moving through her system like really rapidly. And she ended up being admitted to the hospital for like another week. But I like told her she had to go there. One of the only 2 times I sent someone to the ER, like said, just go immediately. And her pulse was like raging. You could just tell from her pulse. This infection was like spreading through her body. So saved her life. That was fun. Okay. Okay. Next one. Now it's starting to get kind of like, what's number 5? What's number 6? What's 7, right? 6, we're going with St. John's wort. Even though it's slightly warming, to me, it has actually a cooling effect. So I still feel like it's very cooling. First aid, though, how are we using this plant? We said it's like a great antidepressant and nervine. How are we using this in a first aid situation? We're going to use this for shingles. Remember, internally and topically, this is one of the best things for shingles, which can totally change people's lives. We're going to topically put it on shingles and internally. Favorite way to do this, we've said many times, is how? Tincture of the fresh, non-dried flowers to get maximum benefit. It's also echinacea, or St. John's wort is the main herb we're going to use for nerve pain, like burning neuropathy pain, acute nerve pain. Someone's had a surgery and now they have all these weird nerve pain, scar tissue pain. This is one of the main ways we use this herb in acute situations, but also shingles pain. This is also one of our top 2 sunburn remedies. For that, we would probably do more the tea or the olive oil infused St. John's wort flower onto the area. This is topical for sunburn. I told you about the kid that passed out on the river when they had just like the entire back was just blisters filled with huge pus. And was so sick, they're puking from heat, from sun exposure. And man, this St. John's wort, and I think we did some wild bergamot too. Just like, I can't believe how quickly this thing healed. No scarring. Didn't even peel. I was like shocked. So St. John's wort we can use for like acute depression and shock and things like that. So it's good to have in your first aid kit. But the other first aid use for this is the nerve pain associated with a toothache. Remember, it's one of our main toothache remedies where you have a tooth infection and that nerve is inflamed. So we can use it for TMJ also. And in acute situation, this is something we also use for like pinched nerves. Like you have sciatic nerve pain, which can be a life changer for people when they have it. you have a bulging disc, and you have extreme spinal nerve pain. That's not going to necessarily cure it, but it's really helpful to manage these things and to help. And it's also, don't forget, one of the top 3 great wound healers of all time with calendula, right? Calendula, yarrow. And we use St. John's wort topically for bruises. Anytime we think the nerves might have been damaged with like a car accident. This is why we also use St. John's wort immediately after a surgery topically to help reduce the likelihood that scar tissue will form. Okay, so this is one of the great herbs we can use internally and topically both. A lot more we could say about it, but that's some of the coolest things. Yeah, it's good for just any kind of nerve pain coming from the disc, even like fused vertebrae, and when people have surgery. You know, in the old days, they did those crazy cage surgeries where, you know, once you have the hardware in your spine, like the nerves, you run the risk of, I know so many people that suffer from that. St. John's wort I've found to be helpful for that type of stuff. For this, you have to use it topically and internally both. Yeah, but it's very helpful for those things. Always thought this is one of the great herbs that if we could ever get herbs approved as injection, this would be one of the great injectable herbs, like they do in other countries for like acute nerve pain and shingles pain and spinal, you know, disc pain. Like this is what they should be injecting in spinal disc when they inject the nerve. Should be injecting St. John's wort.
Do we do it on ourselves?
I don't know how to do it, you know.
There's no shock, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to sterilize stuff and make it all homogenized and that.
But other countries are just doing it.
Not St. John's wort, but there are other herbs that they do inject and do IV drips of, but I just not aware of any St. John's wort injection. Yeah. Remember, St. John's wort is like arnica. We can use it for muscle aches and sprains. It's one of our main herbs for tendonitis. Right? Okay, I want to say a lot more about it, but we just want to get all these covered, right? This is like a good review, too, of all the topics we've covered. Okay. So again, we're calling St. John's wort a nervine, an anodyne, right? A pain reliever or an analgesic. Remember, St. John's wort does not only help the pain of shingles, it is antiviral itself. So we can use it for any kind of viral outbreak, especially chronic viruses like shingles, herpes. We use it for HIV, AIDS, hepatitis. Those things don't always have like acute first aid type situations, though. Okay. Next one. Now it starts to get all kind of gray how we're going to rank these. Good old plantain leaf. Not the plantain banana family, right? Which I think I thought when I was really, really young. Told you that. Made that mistake. Not too embarrassed to admit that. When I was like 12 or so, I thought that's what we were talking about here. But plantain leaf, this is a common weed. How are we using this for first aid, though? So what's that? Yeah, so this is our main drawing poultice, remember? Drawing poultice. It's going to draw stuff out of from below the skin. So we're going to use this for bee stings, bug bites also. We're going to use this for people get a sliver. They can actually pull it up enough where you can pull the stinger or sliver out a lot. We're going to use this for any kind of a pussy sore where we want to pull out. This will actually pull the pus and help it drain out. but it is also anti-inflammatory to your skin for like rashes, or you get like a real itchy skin reaction. Plantain's really good for itchy skin reactions and rashes. You know, you wreck on your bike out in a remote part and wreck on gravel and like scrape your whole arm, we're going to use probably plantain. But it's a drawing poultice. We also love this on dental abscess. We take the herb and kind of chew it and put it right on the abscess, and you want to spit it out in about 15 minutes. So we can use the tincture topically, but the best way to use this is to just have the leaf and put a compress or a poultice right on the pussy area or sore. In a salve, this is one of our main wound healing salves for like psoriasis and eczema. And in a first aid situation, this is what we would put on like dry, chapped skin. This is also a pretty good poison ivy remedy. It's not like the best, but it's also readily available everywhere, right? It's hard to buy at the health food store now and things like that, though, but it's a weed everywhere. But for being such a common weed, the hardest part about harvesting this plant is the fact that it just grows in like disturbed, polluted areas. It's hard to find like plantain in an area where there's no pollution or car exhaust or chemical farm sprays. It's actually kind of hard to find it in nature in the wild because it only likes kind of disturbed soil mostly. It is demulcent. So this is one of our great demulcents. So again, if we are in a first aid situation and we don't have fancy aloe vera, or we don't have marshmallow for the bladder, like this is a great soother for a UTI or bladder irritation because it's demulcent. If we don't have aloe vera for like our acid reflux and digestive inflammation, plantain is great for digestive inflammation because it's a demulcent. We can also use it for kidney stones and bladder stone, but it's really, really good for burning urination with like a UTI.
Stop bleeding? Or no?
Doesn't stop bleeding. No, that's why yarrow is so special. But it heals the wound afterwards. We also mentioned plantain is a really good herb for the ear canal. So for allergies with the ear, or you have like a ear infection, something like that, that can be really painful in a first aid situation, it's really good for. I've used this a lot in a first aid situation. The best way is just the old spit poultice with this one, right? My kids even let me do this the other day on them, even at their age now. They're like, ooh, kind of weird, Dad, but okay. Like that. I don't remember they had a bug bite or something. Worked good. Okay, plantain leaf. Surprisingly, I said kind of hard to find, and a lot of people don't sell it because it's such a weed and it's not used a lot in herbal medicine today that much, but it should be. So remember, what's the most medicinal part of plantain leaf that we always want to have? Very similar to jewelweed in this way. Right at the bottom of the ground where the stem comes up, it'll be really purplish color. That's the part we always want to harvest. That's the most detoxifying part of it. In a first aid situation, if we have nothing else, it is a decent substitute for echinacea if you have like blood poisoning or something like that, because it does detoxify your lymph very strongly. Doesn't work as good, but if that's all we got and it's readily available. Good. Okay. Hanging in there, burning through. What are we on? 7? 8? 8. We're gonna say ginger root. Again, we can go to any grocery store mostly and get fresh ginger root, We can get ginger root dried as a tea, probably at most stores. We can get candied ginger at a lot of places. So ginger root is going to be one of the best remedies. Why? For a lot of the digestive properties. So what do we use it for with digestion? First of all, what's its property? Energy. Hot. It's actually hot, right? Okay. So we're going to use this for nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite from like nausea and vomiting. Actually, a really good diarrhea remedy, because remember, ginger is unique in that it kills a lot of bacteria and viruses both. So making it good for the stomach flu, intestinal viruses, food poisoning, drinking contaminated water. Right. One time I thought my water filter was working and I didn't have it right. Drank a good couple of liters of some good old Plum Creek water. Kind of worked through my system the next day. About 12 hours later, I was feeling it. The old ginger saved the day. But in a first aid situation, it is also very good for motion sickness. Remember? We have to take this before people travel or get spun around or fly or drive.
Is ginger better than activated charcoal for like giardia or like waterborne?
Activated charcoal only like manages the symptoms of like the gas and bloating and that. But ginger actually kills a lot of the bacteria for like giardia and things like that. So they're good combined, like activated charcoal with ginger for stuff like that. But ginger is also good for digestive cramps, intestinal cramps, but is also one of our main food allergy herbs. And for first aid, we also talked about it a lot. Not necessarily first aid, but like it is, remember, a mucus breaking herb. So if you're having just like a really thick sinus congestion or coughing up mucus, it's really good for breaking up mucus. And another first aid use of this topically, how else are we going to use this? I've used this myself once and saved the day. We're going to use it to help prevent frostbite by putting it on our hands or feet. Or how are we going to do this, by the way? Or if someone has like the beginning stages of frostbite. Yeah, the way that I did it was I just took powdered ginger and just put in my socks. Trust me, about no matter how cold your feet are, my feet were like starting to freeze one night because I was camping. It's gonna be really tough in camp in the winter in a really crappy tent with no heating source that I could just tough it out and no fire. Yeah, about 1, 2 in the morning is about all I made it. Like my feet were like burning on fire. They were so cold. I couldn't feel them. Could barely like open my pack to get my hands were like going numb. I think I had a little bit of cayenne too, but it was like powdered ginger. I just threw it in my socks and put my big wool socks back on. And it took about 15 minutes. It just started burning like from the heat instantly. My hands too. What is one precaution you have to remind people of if you do that? Don't touch your eyes, or if you go to the bathroom or something, be careful because that can also burn and irritate. So it's a really good remedy for if you're going to be exposed to cold and you want to prevent like frostbite, or if you're in a first aid situation where you don't have proper gloves, you don't have proper footwear. This is like really helpful. Even just a good old foot bath of it after being exposed to heat. Yeah. Remember once my older daughter, she rarely ever did this. She's just always the lovey-dovey child. She got upset once in winter and she had her bare feet and she ran down the driveway or something for a while. And, she's would never run away. So she like came back right away, But her feet were like burnt. She almost got like it got like really cold on her feet. So we did a little bit of ginger root. Yeah, she was fine immediately, but she got really worried about it. So but that is a good use of ginger root. You can also drink it because it heats your body. So if you're going to be exposed to like cold or the elements, or if you're going to need to heat your body up from being freezing, this is one of the great things you can take. The tea obviously works best for this use, but ginger, really, any way you take it for digestive stuff, it works well. The cheap old capsules work good. Eating like the candied ginger, or like the health food store, you can buy like ginger juice now too. So you can juice it. Tincture is one of my favorite ways to take it in a first aid situation. But yeah, even just the plain, you can buy ginger root powder at any grocery store, right? Not gonna probably get enough of it from like a ginger snap cookie or anything, but yeah, ginger ale is sometimes enough. Yeah, ginger ales can be strong enough to be helpful. But if we're going to take this for like motion sickness, you have to take it at least a half hour before you go for it to work. That's pretty exciting. There's so many other uses, but that's the main ones.
For altitude sickness, I forget.
It's somewhat good for altitude sickness. For that, we usually combine it like with either American ginseng or rhodiola for altitude sickness. It's good for the queasiness of altitude sickness. The only thing I found with using it for altitude sickness is it is very drying, and at altitude people are like dried out. So it's sometimes not the easiest herb to use. I've also mentioned before that, you know, if someone's queasy and vomiting and they've never taken ginger before, that'd be like taking someone from a small town and be like, here, you're nauseous, eat this curry. That's never tried it before. It'd be like, oh, this is so bizarre. And a lot of people can get queasy the first time they take it because it's a weird taste for most Americans that didn't grow up with like an ethnic cuisine, that didn't grow up eating curries and things like that. So I give that precaution. I remember once that I was young, I had my office in Dr. Passer's office. He's this internal medicine doctor, still in practice today. And he was queasy and nauseous. I'm like, this is my chance. Like, I was like so excited. Like, this is my chance. Gave him some ginger. He had never had it before. He puked. And I was like, he felt totally fine after that though. So he was excited, but I was like, really? Like the one chance? But that's where he just wasn't used to the taste of it. So sometimes, things like peppermint are good maybe for vomiting, like in people that are, or kids sometimes that might be a better flavor. Most kids will drink a ginger ale pretty freely though. That's always like a safe bet. Or we talked about anacisip too, being really good for nausea and vomiting if people don't like the taste of ginger. Okay, we're almost to 10, right? 9. I'm just going rogue now. I'm gonna look at my notes. Golden seal. Root. Why? First of all, energy is cold. One of the coldest things in North America, right? One of the coldest non-toxic plants. What the heck are we going to use golden seal? It's probably a top 5, really. Remember, it is, very antibacterial. So we've got echinacea for viruses and things like that. But now we've got like a really strong antibacterial. So this is going to be for bacterial infections where people would maybe need antibiotics, but they can't get to them. This includes topical on like infected wounds and as an antiseptic. We're also sterilizing wounds topically if you don't have like alcohol or iodine or other things in like a first aid wilderness type situation. But internally for all types of bacterial infections. This would include like sinus infections. This would include bacterial infections of the gut, like food poisoning and bacterial food poisoning and diarrhea from food poisoning and diarrhea from an infection, bacterial infections anywhere in the body, lungs, sinus, no matter where it's at. This is going to be one of our best bets. During an infection, when else are we going to always think of golden seal eventually? With its other property. It's a febrifuge, remember? So if someone has any infection where the fever is just not responding to anything, it's not responding to, you know, any medical intervention like Tylenol and that, it's not responding to things like yarrow that we may be giving it, and it just feels like this infection and fever is getting worse, then we would give this as a febrifuge. Okay. And it is also the strongest yeast candida killing thing too. So any kind of skin yeast infection, fungal infection, or yeast or fungal infection internally. Someone has like severe candida or severe yeast infection or a yeast overgrowth anywhere in their body. This would include thrush, right? Cradle cap type things with children, although topically, what's the one concern with using this? It is a stain. It's a yellow stain. So, you know, you don't always want to put it on your face and things like that. It's not like permanent, but it will last a while. And it's also good for any kind of, we use it for acute gallbladder spasms. Remember, it is a great hepatic gallbladder herb. Is it a lot stronger than something like dandelion root or wild yam for liver gallbladder spasms? Yes. So first we'd probably try like bitters for liver gallbladder cramps or spasms or gallstones. And then we would move up to something like golden seal if the other things just aren't working. This is also what we give people for SIBO, right? Small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Your gut's overgrown with yeast or candida or bacteria. We're going to do golden seal. For that, we're probably going to combine it with something really warm and spicy like ginger. Yeah. But basically, if we're in a situation where you can't get medical attention and you think someone would need an antibiotic, this is like the best option we have until someone can get an antibiotic. This includes like antibiotic resistant infections, like staph and MRSA and things like that. Strep, staph, MRSA.
If it will kill the things that antibiotics won't, then how would you?
Well, it's a really powerful antibacterial, but it doesn't always work as strong as like an antibiotic, unfortunately. Oh, the question was, why would we just not use this instead of antibiotics? And it's just really more, it's just not as like concentrated or quite as powerful. That's all. Can you combine golden seal with antibiotics? Yeah, we do that, especially when people have like resistant bacteria that maybe they have like bronchitis and they're not getting better. They've been like their 4th round of antibiotics, or someone has a wound that's not healed. I just saw this lady a couple weeks ago that it's just so upsetting. But she very like level 10 reactivity, sensitivity, and has all these chronic nerve pains all over her body. And the type of people that end up at a natural medicine practitioner's office because there's not any other options. Well, some reason this one doctor convinced her to try this risky nerve surgery where they cut some nerves to try to help the pain. And they cut a nerve like in her hip and ankle. And she has really allergic reactive skin and everything. And she immediately felt worse afterwards. And pain, like fever, all the classic infection, kept going in and out of the ER. And finally her husband was like, it was like the surgeon, everyone's just like, yeah, it's just whatever, antibiotic, not getting better, not getting better. And finally went to I think the husband finally said, like, we're gonna sue you if you don't like cut this damn cast off because something is like not right. She's been in the hospital, which makes any doctor go like, oh, okay. Like she went to wound. Yeah, the doctor still didn't do anything though, much about it. And she showed me this. I mean, she came in like this picture is like her, you can see her bone, like a hole in her heel, and her bone and tendon and muscle and everything. It's like that's like really serious. She had reacted to the surgery tape and her whole body was reacting in that area. And she went to wound care the next day at Methodist, thankfully, started to like really take it seriously. And, so finally she started getting the help. But the surgeon still never ever called her back or followed up or anything. Where was I going with this story? She did. Yeah, she was still on the antibiotics and all that, but this wound was just crazy, like that you could even not freak out when you saw it. It was like a big gaping hole about like that, where even like where it's stitched, it just like broken apart, and the surgeon wasn't like really concerned about it or something. I don't remember where I was going with that, but it was something with Golden Seal. We did Golden Seal with some other things. Yeah, she could not put any, I didn't want her to put anything on it topically because it was so medically like scary and risky. I wanted to wait till the tissue healed up enough where you could put something on it. And it finally did. But I forget what we did Golden Seal, but I think we combined it with Echinacea and I think St. John's wort and calendula. It was just like a kind of a basic little thing. It wasn't like super fancy. More for like the sepsis like experience she was having. Yeah, and in a week, like all the skin had started to grow back, like the whole thing had kind of like healed over. And then the wound care at Methodist was doing a good job of, they're really good there. They understand wounds. I don't remember where I was going with that, but it was Golden Seal. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. I haven't really used honey like all that much that way. I didn't know if you could put it in stuff. You have to get like the medical honey, or is it just okay? I know they sell like medical honey, and I read it. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. She uses Manuka honey with her animals she sees in the vet clinic. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, this lady, we did the echinacea for like the chronic non-healing wound and like the sepsis like situation, and calendula. I think we did St. John's wort because she was in severe pain and nerve pain from it. And yeah, you just felt for this lady because she's already been through so much. And she's so young. I mean, she's way younger than me. And she's had like, I think 30 surgeries already in her life. She's only like 30. Yeah. Has like a really amazing husband and mother and family, luckily. Otherwise, she would be probably in a really bad way. Okay. Golden seal. Anytime we need a really strong antifungal or to kill yeast or bacteria. Right. Plantain is cooling, for sure. Demulcent and cooling. Next one, we're just kind of starting to get random. We're at 10 now, I think, right? Black cohosh. Why black cohosh? Root, first of all, what's the energy? Cold to cooling. Yeah, I was somewhere in that spectrum. It's definitely cool. Maybe cold. What's its category that it falls into that we're using it for here? A little bit of a nervine and especially antispasmodic. So here we have our first like muscle antispasmodic. You know, a lot of things in an ER room discharge or antispasmodic medications because people have a lot of tension, a lot of pain or trauma. So this is our main, black cohosh root is our main herb we're using for trauma that has affected the muscles in any way. So this is the aches or pains after like an accident, whiplash. This is one of our main whiplash remedies, muscle tears, muscle aches, muscle pains, muscle spasms, severe muscle tension. Anytime a pain syndrome has like tight muscles with it. But it just also happens to be especially good for whiplash, like so specific. If you've ever had whiplash, you should just do this remedy for a while. So for whiplash and things like that, or like someone has maybe had their neck injured from an accident, we're going to massage it up and down the spine, the whole back and all the muscles, the tincture. And then we're going to also give it to people internally. But this thing moves, yeah, does help to move the cerebral spinal fluid. So when people take this the first time, like after having whiplash, you can feel like, whoa, really spacey. I think I told you about my college really good friend who was really nerdy. She had whiplash multiple times, and one night I was like, Angela, you should just try this on your neck, you know? She's like, okay, yeah. And I remember she got up and she looked and she kept blinking and she's like, I can't see. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, what do you mean you can't see? It's like, I can't see. Like, how do you feel? She's like, I feel dizzy. I feel lightheaded. How's your neck feel? She's like, it feels totally fine. Like it feels a lot better. She's like, I can't see. I was like, I mean, I knew it couldn't make somebody blind, but but pretty young. I was just like probably a sophomore in college. I was kind of like, this is interesting. Took about 3 to 5 minutes and her sight came back, but she was totally blind for a short time. I think it just created so much movement within the back of the neck that it probably just affected the nerves and the movement of the cerebral spinal fluid that it did that. But this is an amazing whiplash remedy. I think I told you about the other time I lived with all the college kids who wanted me to be like their fraternity dad or something to heal them and help them. It was the worst choice I ever made in my life. We got all these case studies out of it. This kid had got in a drunk driving accident, rolled his truck, and came from the hospital back to the house and had all these young kids around me, like college kids who were like, some of them were kind of drinking and drunk. And his spine, like you could see from the x-ray too, went like, whoa. And I had tincture of black cohosh or J-Closs liniment. I rubbed it up and down his back and it was kind of like shiny and like the light was just perfect. And you can literally see the back muscles in the spine like move. And everyone was like, whoa, what the heck was that? And then he like got up and he was like kind of dizzy, but then he felt like all his pain, most of his pain went away. It's like just that dramatic of like an antispasmodic. Very, very cool. We also saw like a ripple through his back, like his muscles like went whoosh. Very, very cool. So this is a really good herb when we hold trauma and muscle tissue, or you've had accidents in the past, or you just have fibromyalgia, or you have other restless leg syndrome, you have muscle cramps, muscle spasms. But remember, along those lines, this is an important remedy on this list in a top 10. What other immune application does this herb really shine for? Why it has to be in a top 10 list? So we can use it for menopausal, like sweats and hot flashes, for sure, which can be very acute and very uncomfortable for people. What other immune use? Remember, we talked about this. This is a really unique febrifuge. So when people have fever that is moving in a bad way, what do we mean by bad way? It's not only getting high, but people are displaying like meningitis and encephalitis symptoms, like becoming non-responsive, getting the glassy eye, the far off look, becoming non-responsive. The neck is starting to get stiff. Remember the warning signs we talked about with like encephalitis and meningitis? This happens a lot in Nebraska, and people go to the hospital for this every day in Omaha. And guess what? After you're out of the hospital, it's still a pretty long recovery, right? You feel like, again, depleted and crappy and run down and achy and tired for a long time. So, in people that have ever had meningitis or encephalitis, which is life-threatening, sometimes COVID did this to people. Usually it's other viruses that do this. There's also some superbugs now. So there's some encephalitis, meningitis, drug-resistant bugs out there now that have been documented in Omaha too, affecting mostly children and the elderly, but it happens to regular people sometimes. So we use this for meningitis and encephalitis, beginning stages or symptoms that look like it, or as people are out of the hospital too, or if we're in like a wilderness cabin, we have no other option, this is kind of what we would do. That's what I mean by a fever is moving in a bad way. This is also an old measles remedy when we have like a real serious viral infection where you have a whole body skin breakout and all the other viral symptoms with it. We typically use black cohosh for. It's very cool herb. Also very good for tension, headaches, migraines, dizziness. This is one of our main people that get vertigo, that have inner ear problems, which can be a life changer. I see a lot of clients that have there's no treatment for a lot of these inner ear vertigo type disorders. It's a great vertigo inner ear remedy for people who are constantly getting vertigo inner ear. That's a life changer too for a lot of people. Yeah, so remember, snake medicine to unblock what is blocked. Wherever the tension or stagnation is, black cohosh just gets there and releases it. So very cool first aid herb to not forget about. Also really good for broken bones and sprains and strains, because a big part of the healing is getting the muscle tissue to heal and getting the tension and inflammation out. And black cohosh topically is really good. Broken bones, sprains, strains, contusions, very, very good for. Used it a lot on vertigo. It is for Meniere's too, but that's usually not an emergency, but it's often helpful for Meniere's, like ringing in the ears. If you know anybody who's ever had a concussion, the back of the head got hit. That's the worst part, right? We talk about wood betony for concussion protocol, but remember black cohosh is also a really huge concussion protocol herb, especially when people have a lot of headaches, tension, extreme tension in the upper back and neck after head trauma, or have whiplash and other problems with it. You know, whether people like medically have whiplash diagnosed or not, if you got in any kind of car accident or fell and hit your head, have been like shaken ever, like, I mean, you have the same problem, whether we call it whatever we want to call it, right? Just that shaking, that trauma, that stopping going. So
Amusement parks.
totally, that's why I don't write them. I just watch them. I just don't do that. Especially the spinny, jerky one, like is so bad for people. So bad for your spine. Or black cohosh is like a tai chi herb, but helps like find alignment, movement. Just not emergency, but black cohosh we said is also good for pelvic floor dysfunction. When women have misalignment, like after childbirth, delivery, uterine issues, and the whole pelvic floor is having pain, or the pelvic, what the physical therapists call just your core is unstable, your pelvis is unstable. It's really, really helpful for. In fact, it's specific for what we call lax pelvic ligaments. When the pelvis, all the ligaments lack tone and you're getting misalignment from it, major herb. Okay. Yes. Yeah, for head trauma. Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. 11, we can't go without chamomile flower, chamomile flower. Cool. One of the great all-time first aid remedies from Europe, right? What, I mean, we can use this for about anything. So first aid wise, you ready for this? This is like a top probably 10. Nausea, vomiting, anxious stomach, digestive cramps or pains, ulcers, ulcer pain, inflammation of the bowel like colitis, ulcerative colitis, bleeding from the digestive tract, any kind of mouth sore, mouth ulcer, throat sore, throat ulcer. But it's also an amazing nervine, very calming to the nerves, especially good for when the nerves are affecting your digestive system, like IBS. You have what we call a nervous stomach. It's also great for muscle aches and pains and muscle tension. It is not quite as strong as Midol, but it's very strong for menstrual cramps and pains. It's a sedative for children. Sometimes adults, it's good for insomnia too, but it just does so many things. It was more than that, but like first aid wise. And then topically, it's also one of the great wound healers. One of the secret remedies for reversing aging in the skin topically. There's so many other first aid uses, but it's a great one to have around. That's almost every grocery store, Dollar General, Walgreens, you know, green tea, peppermint, chamomile, sometimes ginger. Those are like the 4 you can find about at any grocery store. You know, if you know anybody with any kind of European ancestry, like chamomile is just, everybody does chamomile. Everybody has it. Okay. So many other uses, but that's when you, like we said, when you buy this, you appreciate it because you have to grow a lot of chamomile to get a pound. Like you gotta have a big patch of chamomile to get that much. So chamomile. Okay. Any other uses for it just off the top? Oh, one of the best for colicky babies, grumpy, grouchy, constipated, bloated people. Acid reflux, I mean, you name it, where your gut, it heals everything. If we don't have aloe vera for our gut, this is like a great backup. Okay. It can be used for like a really dry sinus and that too. Yep. Use it on sunburns and emergencies too, if it's all we had. Just a lot of things like that. It's a really good trauma herb because it is really good. It really is calming to the nerves with trauma and relaxes all the muscles, just your whole body. Just, probably overall one of the, in America, probably the most underappreciated herb in America. Because so many people drink it and they think of it as like just a nice tea, but a lot of people, even a lot of practitioners, don't really appreciate its power. If you're going to use a tea bag of it, you might have to do 2 or 3 tea bags in a cup to really get a medicinal brew. Especially if you're going to buy like a Dollar General or something, but really, really helpful for. Questions on chamomile? Yeah.
I read that if you drink 1 cup of tea a day,
I don't know about the percent, but yeah, I mean, just it's one of the great preventative herbs and even anti-aging herbs in European history. It's a very anti-aging property. I mean, common sense wise, even just the way it calms the nerves, it's just going to reduce the effects of stress on your body. But this is also a great pediatric herb. That's why it's also on this list, because for like anxiety and fussiness with infants and kids and colicky babies, insomnia and nightmares with kids, this is just like a great remedy for that type of stuff. Okay, we probably get 1 or 2 more. Now we're getting to where it's pretty questionable. What's next? Let's do a couple more. Okay. Were we at 12? Bone set. Let's just make this one really simple. Bone set herb. It's cold. It's antiviral. When do we use it? Any kind of viral infection. The worse the fever, the better. We said specifically what symptom do we look for to use bone set? Achiness in the muscles and especially all the way down into the bones. The more achy you are with like an infection, or this could be like a tick disease too, or a cold or flu or COVID, the worst viruses that maybe aren't responding to anything else because it's pretty extreme and really powerful, or fevers that just won't go down. It's good for breaking a fever that just won't go down from more mild herbs. And you get a lot of achiness in the muscles and bones. Also got its name quite literally because this is the herb we do when people break a bone to help it set. So after you break a bone, you're going to put this on topical of the area. If you have a cast on, then we try to like do it like above or below the area. But very, very helpful for bones and set bones. This is also an herb we can do topically when people have like broke a rib or have a rib out of place that hurts like heck. We can put that on topical. Sometimes it'll just set like a rib really nicely. Also, zombie apocalypse virus, crazy virus. That's our best shot, our best chance bone set. So we're going to have in our emergency mutated virus. Nobody knows anything about. We don't know what's going to work. It's our best shot. It helped with COVID a lot. We're pretty sure it would have, but we didn't know for sure. The last pandemic, the Spanish flu before COVID, it's the herb that worked too. One of the herbs that saved more lives than any other herb. Yeah.
For whatever they're cooking up next for us, we'll use bone set.
You got it. This bone set. That's the one for sure. Any kind of engineered, probably biological attack too. I mean, I hate to talk about this stuff, but it's happening. It exists. So yeah, biologically designed attack, like, you know, the military and people think about this. Most Americans don't think about it, but an engineered attack was probably our best chance, right? You know, something like Ebola and that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that would be the number one herb I would throw at it. So the dose bone set is pretty bitter and horrible as a tea. So, and you can't buy it as a capsule, so it's tincture only. We're going to do, you know, 30 to 60 drops, probably 3 or 4 times a day, just your standard dose. About any herb, we're going to keep with that dose. Okay, let's try to get maybe 2 more. 12, 13. Okay, slippery elm. Why are we going to do slippery elm bark? Energy, cool to neutral, and it's demulcent, it's a soother. Why do we want this for first aid?
Digestive problems.
What kind of digestive problems? So any kind of irritation from our mouth to our colon. This one we're going to do as a capsule or tea only, or we're going to put the powder into like oatmeal and eat it like a gruel. That's a traditional way. It's good to remember that this is a famine food. This is a historical famine food because it's a fibrous substance. What a lot of Native Americans would eat during famines to keep their digestive system from shutting down and to feel a little full. Hopefully we don't ever experience that. But this is one of the main demulcent soothing agents. So we would use it for constipation as like a fiber source. We would use it for diarrhea as like a fiber source. Just all around regulates the lower bowel. Because you have diarrhea or kind of like American triphala. It's just kind of good for everything. And this is a stool softener too, non-habit forming stool softener. The difference between this and a drug is that slippery elm does heal everything it touches. So mostly we're going to use this for the bowel, or we're going to use this a lot for the throat, right? The main remedy for singers and singer's throat. A lot of singers don't know about this, but vocal coaches that are really famous sure do. When I worked at No Name, there was always like famous people would come in with their entourage. Musicians, their assistants would come into the store with this list of like 30 things that these millionaire musicians expect to have at like the Quest Center. Like, and it's like throat coat tea, it was like honey loquat syrup, like slippery elm lozenges, like all these famous people know all this, but it's not talked about a lot. If we also ingested a poison and we didn't have like activated charcoal, this would be kind of like a fibrous thing we would do to try to absorb some of the toxins, like a sponge a little bit. Okay. I used to eat it every day as a gruel and just put it in oatmeal, or you can just make a gruel out of it. This is also a historical convalescent food, meaning an elderly person, a young child, an adult who's more fragile, has recovered from a serious illness and has no appetite, can't eat, can't keep anything down, just and they're wasting away. This is a food historically that I've used this a lot for like malnourished people, that you give to like get the digestive system going again and to stimulate the appetite. And usually for that, we just put a little bit in hot water and maybe like a little bit of oatmeal or barley or something and make just kind of like a porridge. It actually tastes really good. It's pleasant tasting. It's very sweet. It's what the Native Americans, I know, I've always heard that's what they fed the horses during famines too. The bark of it. Okay, let's do 14. Okay, let's try to at least get to 15. Willow bark. Can't have a first aid without a willow bark. Which type of willow are we talking about? Right, trick question. Any willow pretty much universally will work. Chances are the leaves will probably work too, but the bark is usually the part we use. Any willow. Okay, why is this in a first aid remedy? This is our, when we want an aspirin, an Advil or Tylenol, but we don't have it. For severe aches, pains, headaches, cramps, anything. Unlike Advil and Tylenol and naproxen and some of those things, this does not usually irritate the digestive system, despite contrary beliefs. It is not a true blood thinner. It is really effective for any kind of chronic ache or pain or headache or migraine anywhere. On a first aid note, this is one of our main also herbs. Do not forget for diarrhea. This is a major diarrhea herb. Any kind of diarrhea, whether it's food allergy, food poisoning, intestinal bugs, you just have diarrhea because you have colitis. This is one of our main inflammation in the bowel herbs that we use to manage like colitis and things like that. When else are we going to use this in a first aid situation? Again, we have tried other things for an infection and fevers like spiking, getting worse and worse and worse. Just like you would use an aspirin or Tylenol in the hospital, we're going to give someone willow to try to, because it's a febrifuge, to try to help lower their fever really quickly and to manage all the inflammation associated with that too. Okay. This is a really good herb for muscle tension, muscle cramps, muscle spasms too. This combines beautifully with black cohosh for muscle aches or pains. If people are on heavy duty painkillers and heavy duty Advil, willow bark can still, it works differently. Its chemistry is really complex. It can still have a pain relieving effect complementary to morphine, Tylenol of codeine. It can still be beneficial for people that are in like severe pain and that. Way better than like CBD and some of those things where a lot of like inflammation processes. There's some other use for it. That's the first aid one I forgot about. It's the main one. Okay, one more. Do 1 minute, one last remedy. That's a hard one. Hard to just do one. Just because it's around and everywhere. And it's always good to live through infections, right? Garlic. Energy is hot, spicy, irritating. Why garlic in this whole remedy here? First aid. Yeah, it kills about everything to some degree, right? It's kills most viruses, bacteria, and also yeast and fungus, molds. So this would be good. We use this for any, when COVID happened, this is what everybody should have been grabbing at the grocery store. They should have been stockpiling all the garlic because we can cook with this. We can make like garlic syrup for kids, honey syrups, but just cooking with it, and just even putting it in chicken stock or something. It's really helpful. But remember, this is also one of our main herbs for respiratory congestion, mucus, sinus congestion, clears all mucus from the body. And especially good for respiratory infections, but it'll help infections about anywhere. Don't forget a little weird thing we forget about garlic. Guess what? It is an alternative. A lot of things in that rose family are. So it does purify the blood and the entire lymphatic system when you get like a really bad infection. Just so happens it's really good for the heart and all kinds of other stuff too. But that's how we would use it more for like a first aid situation. Okay. I feel like we made 15. Those are pretty debatably maybe the 15 most diverse herbs. We've got most life threatening wilderness first aid things all in there, right? Yeah, and I mean, it starts to get, it's pretty much wide open after about 20 there. The only thing we didn't mention is that's just good to have around always too in your first aid kits is the old activated charcoal. What if we can't buy activated charcoal? What do we do? Yeah, we make it. How do we make it? Ashes, right? Just burn ash, burn a stick until it's carbonized, right? That's all activated charcoal is just burnt wood. Fun fact, almost all medical activated charcoal is made in Crawford, Nebraska. So it's from Nebraska trees. Most of all the medical charcoal sold in the world is burnt at some place outside of town, I think. And that's where people get it. All right. That's why the old timers ate charcoal pancakes, right? Just make pancakes and you just throw them in the charcoal. No, really. Yeah, because the charcoal is good for impurities and toxins. And I mean, yeah, it's called charcoal pancakes. True story. All right.